Good evening. This is the Plymouth Charter Commission meeting in the Great Hall on May 2nd. We also are meeting by hybrid for those that are going to be watching by Zoom. It is a hybrid meeting, in person as well as via a Zoom webinar, and can be viewed live on the local government cable channel 15 and 47 for Verizon. This meeting is being recorded. Zoom attendees must register using the Zoom webinar link on the Charter Commission page of the town website. The Zoom attendees for public comment, please use the raise hand icon on the lower portion of your screen. And the in-person audience for public comment, please use the podium and place your name on the sign-in sheet. We'll begin tonight's meeting with a Pledge of Allegiance. So tonight's agenda, we'll start off with the town manager in a couple minutes at 7 o'clock. And then the Collins Center people will be here, two of them by Zoom at 7:30. And that discussion will continue with the Committee of Precinct Chairs until we hopefully finish that item and move to the, so by next week, we need to really finish up the COPC and have a draft that's ready for the charter. And then we move right on to the Finance Committee. We'll see how far we can get tonight. And we will be meeting next week, a week from tonight, without the Collins team. They will be back in 2 weeks. So the first item on tonight's agenda is a warm welcome to our town manager, Mr. Brindisi. Here to us from, I guess most recently from Upton, but now in Plymouth.
That's right.
Back again in Plymouth. Welcome.
Thank you. May I?
Go ahead.
Good evening, everybody.
By the way, before you start, we do have a copy of the charter that you marked up. Everybody's seen your proposed comments, changes. Go ahead. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, everybody. So let me first start by saying that I had the opportunity to look through the charter. I've recently come from Upton, where I worked 5 years as their town manager. Do I have to lean into this? Can you not hear me? How's that, better? Thank you. So as you know, I just came from Upton 5 years. That's an open town meeting form of government. But then prior to that, I was here. But prior to coming as the assistant town manager back in 2015, 2017, I worked for the city of Worcester for 15 years, which is a Plan E form of government. So it's a strong city manager, council form of government. So when I heard about the commission as I was interviewing for the position, I thought, well, given the fact that I worked for 3 different forms of government, maybe I could offer some ideas and some suggestions for consideration. But just so I'm clear, these are just ideas and thoughts after reviewing the Plymouth Charter, and I'm happy to lend any other advice if you ask me to. I'm happy to exit stage left if you want that as well. So whatever the commission needs of me or asks from me, I'm here to assist. So with that being said, I think you've all have received my mocked up copy of the charter. So I thought I would just walk the commission through and just go over some of the items that I thought should be under consideration. But let me just finish before I go and dive into it. When I think of town form of government or charters in particular, I think of form and function. So what form of government do you want, and what functions within that form of government are you looking to accomplish? So I think I've heard over and over that this group is really trying to make government more efficient. You've decided to choose the town meeting a representative form of government with a select board and a town manager. So given the context of that, I guess the question is, how can we make it more efficient? And that was kind of really where I was coming from with my comments to this document, looking at the charter and trying to find opportunities for efficiencies. So that being said, let me, one other item before I forget. One of the things that I'm working with the departments on right now, and we're going through a goal-setting process. So we're going to identify goals and objectives for the next 12 months and beyond. At some point, we will then take that to the select board so they can have a workshop to complete that goal-setting process. But one of the overarching goals that I've already talked to departments about is looking at all of our bylaws. You'll notice that some of our bylaws are antiquated, so I'm definitely stealing a page from Governor Baker's playbook. When he became governor, he said to all his executive officers, he wanted each office to review every statute that those offices were responsible for. And I know this because I sat on the State Public Health Council for 6 years, and every meeting we reviewed antiquated, old public health regulations. So stealing that item, I've asked the departments to do the same. So let's look at all of our bylaws and see which ones are working, which ones aren't working, and which ones we need to modify. So that'll help in your effort to make government more efficient, right? So the bylaws are a part of government, like our policies are a part of government. So we'll be doing that in conjunction with your review. So getting back to my comments that I had sent through the chair, these pages aren't numbered, so bear with me. But so I'll start on section 12 of the Advisory and Finance Committee. I just pointed out the fact that this is also verbatim, almost verbatim, in the town's bylaw. So again, it calls into the question, I guess, why do we have the same language in the charter as we do in the bylaw? And so if that's the case, should they be extracted in one place or the other?
Can I suggest that as you go along, we may interject and ask questions? and
Absolutely, yeah,
make
I'm happy.
comments? That particular point is very well taken. The Charter Advisory and Finance Committee and the bylaw one, they both kind of grew separately. The bylaw would jump up and then the charter would go. It's quite awkward, and you're right, the two have to mesh and be put together, and maybe, perhaps, the bylaw was supposed to fine-tune the charter, but it began to assert provisions that looked like they were substantive in themselves. But I agree, we need to take a look at that.
And you're absolutely right. That's a great comment about, when I reviewed the city of Worcester's charter, they don't have bylaws in Worcester. In city form of government, they have ordinances. It's like a bylaw. And so, their charter is form and function, and their ordinances, which is Plymouth's bylaws, feed into their form and function. So I think that's something that the commission should consider, that, if we really have a strong framework of the town's charter, that we use the bylaw as a way to get at some of the operational aspects and not have it wedded within the charter itself. And you'll see through my discussion that we really get down in the weeds of department operations in the charter, which makes it very difficult to meet those mandates. In fact, I heard last week in this very room that you were looking at an entity, maybe COPC, maybe the town manager, that holds all departments and boards and committees accountable to adhering to the charter. Well, right now, I can tell you right now, we're violating the charter in many different ways because it's getting down in the weeds of the operations, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. So moving on the next page, under 212-4, and this was brought to my attention by, as you know, Lynn Barrett, our finance director. It references the fact that departments cannot expend more than 1/12 of its annual appropriation in any given month, or the final month, I should say. And so, I know you all know this, but many of our departments spend more than 1/12 of their department operations in the final month. So let's think of the recreation department, right? A lot of the seasonals will come on board. The harbor master's office, a lot of their seasonals will come on board. So again, we're violating this aspect of the charter because operations dictate otherwise. So I just bring, again, these are just recommendations for you to consider.
I think the finance director made the same point
Yeah, she
you
did.
just made.
She asked me to reiterate it, so.
Derek, I suspect that that came a long time ago, when people were concerned that departments or divisions were going to spend money just because they had it. Having been a division head for 28 years, it never happened in my division, but always spent binding money in the last month of the year because that's when it was ready to go. So it was already on my list even before you suggested it, and I think that I didn't hear any opposition when it's come before us, and I suspect that we're going to eliminate that section.
Like Larry, in the implementation of the Community Preservation Act for the last 20 years, we have this administrative budget that we kind of plan out what we're going to utilize the budget for. And sometimes we know what our big operations are, but as the seasons change in terms of improving trailheads and hiking and signage, we have to get through that winter to see what the damage was, so we can get ready for the summer months. So again, I understand what the rationale of trying to control departments from just spending money that's there, or just the nature of a department and how they function and where they spend most of their money. So it's an interesting point.
Yeah, I think, it's the old use it or lose it mentality, right? And for many decades, I'm sure that's how government operated. I encourage our department division heads to be very frugal with their expenditures, because I know that all the money that's left over falls to free cash, and free cash turns into capital. So that's my thought.
Yeah, it's interesting with the Community Preservation Administrative Fund that it just reverts back to the fund itself, and town meeting has to allocate it the next year. So we never find the pressure of like spend it because it's there. Because if we don't utilize it, it just reverts back into the CPA fund, and then town meeting has to reauthorization for that purpose.
May I ask a
Yep,
question?
Betsy?
Thank you, Derek. Is the problem with 212-4, unless it's been approved by the Advisory and Finance Committee, is that the problem, that it's too cumbersome to be approved by Advisory and Finance?
Well, I do think it would be cumbersome because there's just a lot of activity that's happening the last month. Certainly, it could be taken to Advisory and Finance, and it would more or less, they would recognize that these are seasonal appropriations that have to be made. So I don't see any pushback from the Advisory and Finance Committee at all. But again, just talking to Lynn, she was just restating that we don't adhere to that, and it's something the commission should consider, because we're not adhering to it, and we don't want to violate the charter if we don't have to.
So is it your recommendation we just strike that provision?
Yes.
Other comments? Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm comfortable with the idea of striking it entirely. So I'll think about that some more. Because the Advisory and Finance meets all year round, don't they? I mean, so they can meet and approve, unless, you have 15 departments all asking for approvals. So I'm not sure that I understand why the departments, for example, I don't understand right now why some departments now are not adhering to the charter and going to the Advisory and Finance Committee. I don't understand why people are right now breaking the charter. Why don't they just go to the Advisory and Finance Committee and ask for the appropriate, the approval for the expenditure?
Sure, I mean, that's a valid question. I can take that back to Lynn and the team and try to understand the details of what's happening in the month of June. Again, it's especially the seasonal staff that we're hiring, and that's really been the crux of the matter.
But they will spend it by July 1, right?
Oh, they'd have to, yeah.
They have
Yep.
to. So it seems to me going by June 1st, they should have a pretty good idea by June 1st, so they could run that by the Advisory and Finance Department, I would think. But it sounds like they're spending the money right along, without, in other words, they may be doing the one, still not sticking to the 1/12 even before June 1st. Is that correct?
But is it your point that it happens so much in the last month, many different agencies, this would require you to go to the Finance Committee, which would just be sort of an unnecessary burden, because you're going to expect it every 12th month of every fiscal
I think
year?
that's the point, that this is going to happen either way
Right.
with the expenditures, the seasonal expenditures. And I think it's because of that, they're probably not going to A and F for those purposes, because this is a natural occurrence, an annual natural occurrence. It's different than, it's not like they're trying to buy a fire truck in the month of June because they have extra money. You know, it's seasonal staff. So, I mean, I can follow up and learn more about the mechanics of why they've chosen not to go to A and F for that, but I can report back if.
I mean, they are violating the charter by not going to A and F right now. And they have been for some time, from what I understand. And it's in this final month that there could be one meeting of Advisory and Finance to go over extra expenses. In other words, one of the things that I made a commitment not to do when I started as a charter commissioner was not to throw something out unless I knew why it existed, because typically somebody puts something in because there's been a problem.
Right.
And so what's the problem been? Why did it go in? Could that problem happen again? So throughout everything we do, I don't want to throw anything out until I know why it was put in and what problem it was solving. So thank you.
I think that the issue is that it is unnecessary now. I know that my budget was reviewed not just going forward, but the subcommittee of Advisory and Finance reviewed how much I had spent in the previous year. And therefore, I think that there was a time when individual departments were much more separated and independent from central authority. Not the case now. When money is being spent, Finance Department knows about that money being spent, enough to do without putting burdens on divisions if it's not accomplishing anything. I think the only thing that could be accomplished would be if, as we were talking, someone was going to go out and buy a fire engine just because they had the money. I've not seen any instances of that. So, you know, I'm pretty, this was on my list originally for dismissal. It might have been useful in the past, simply not
Okay.
now.
David?
Just as clarification, I'm thinking of capital projects or multi-year projects, clearly are sort of excluded by just saying the annual appropriation. But I just wasn't sure whether you could add language saying, excluding capital or excluding, multi-year approvals. But clearly, the cash flow demands of capital projects, when you're billed, when you pay it, do not fit into this 1/12 guideline. So it needs more clarification, or I'm leaning toward also potentially dropping this paragraph.
Any other comment on this one? So maybe you could just tell us if this, in your opinion, is still practical or not, and then just get back to us on
Sure,
that
I
one
can report
point,
back.
so we can make a decision one way or the other. Thank
Sure.
you.
All right, I know we're pressed for time, so I'm going to try to drive forward. So 3-2-1, this is just a quick statement. It says, it talks about the select boards as the
Right.
goal-setting, long-range planning, and policy-making board. And then it says, it shall make recommendations on major courses of action. What it doesn't state is their responsibility to setting the
Right.
warrant. So it's just a thought, do you want to include that in there?
Yes, we're going to be rewriting that. I made the note here, but you're right, that should have been in there.
So driving forward, 3-2-5, in this, it talks about the board has the power to approve all collective bargaining agreements, which is true. That's their authority. So I guess my question is, why do we send them to town meeting? Most communities that I've worked in, they don't send their collective bargaining agreements themselves. They've already been negotiated, they've already been approved and ratified by the Board of Selectmen. And so they're getting another review at town meeting. And so I guess the question is, for something to consider why we do that, I can tell you it combusts a lot of energy to respond to the dozens upon dozens of calls from town meeting members asking why we negotiated a certain proposal with a certain union.
Well,
So,
isn't it the appropriation, the money aspect of it? I mean, these collective bargaining agreements are very important at town meeting. I mean, they do get debate and they get considered, I mean, because of the money that's involved, isn't that?
and you would draw that connection that it's because they're the legislative body and they're going to appropriate the
Right.
funds. But I can tell you, though, from what I witnessed this past March, town meeting members ask a litany of questions about the collective bargaining agreement itself. In
Okay.
fact, we had one person who asked who was on the bargaining team and what their credentials were. And it was all being driven by the collective bargaining agreement and not about the appropriation itself. So
Right.
again, I'm just putting that out there for consideration.
No, I understand your point now, yep.
So 3-2-7.
We may be able to clarify that.
Yeah, just a
Wrestling?
comment on that. I think that collective bargaining's done behind closed doors.
That's right.
And the only time that the public gets to see those, comment on them, and discuss them is at town meetings. So I think that that's kind of an important part of our legislative body, being able to look at those. So I would not be in favor of taking anything like that out of town meeting.
Well, I don't think it's in town meeting, it's just a practice, is all I'm pointing out. It's very clear in this document that it says right here, the select board shall have the power to approve all collective bargaining agreements to which the town is contracting, so on and so forth. It doesn't state that these collective bargaining agreements are approved by town meeting. Now, again, the appropriation is, we can all agree on that, but we spend a lot of time talking about the details of the CBA, when it's clear in the charter that the agreement itself is approved and ratified by the select board.
Yeah, which
So I'm looking at practice versus what the
Yeah.
charter
We'll be
states.
discussing that, I made a note.
So the 3-2-7, it talks about an investigation by the town manager. And then it goes on to say that this will be published in the annual report. We could check with council on that, but I think that's illegal. I would not want to publish an investigation on any person or officials of the town. That would be held within confidence. But again, it's a requirement within the charter
Cool,
that
yep,
any investigation has to be published.
We will check that, got it.
Moving on to the next page.
Could I ask a question?
Yep.
Why do you think that went in the first place? 3-2-7, why was that ever put in there? Does anybody know why it went in there in the first place? The publishing it in the town report. Does anyone know why that went in the first place?
There may be some sort of right of privacy involved, or, defamation or whatever. There's certainly, employees have rights. But I think this is one of the kind of points we want to check with council.
All right, is it the second sentence that you object to, Derek, or the whole thing?
I'm concerned about having to publish it in a public document. That's
This
my
is the
concern.
report part.
So, in other words, you would want this paragraph to end with the word, shall be filed in the town manager's office, period,
I think that'd be appropriate.
and then
Yes.
take out the rest? Okay, I
Yes,
just wanted to
yep.
be clear.
Thank you. Moving on to the next page. So you'll see there's a section that says the town manager shall, and it's under paragraph A on the, right around the 11th line. It talks about,
So
It
where are
talks-
you, on what page, what item?
it's under 3-5-1. It states the town manager shall. I think
Okay.
it's the 11th line down. So this has to do with suspensions, appointments, discipline. And I've seen this in other acts, so this isn't unique. It says that regardless of title shall take effect on so we're talking about
Right.
discipline, shall take effect on the 15th day after the town manager files notice of the action with the select board. So we're talking about a disciplinary action. If I need to take disciplinary action, I can't wait 15 days,
What do you suggest?
striking it in its entirety. This was actually this was language that was used in the town of Upton's special legislation for the town manager. And we had come across issues where, because this language required the town manager to notify the select board and then give them 15 days to take action, you know, we would have somebody who was disciplined that's still going to work for 2 weeks.
What section is this again, Derek?
So under 3-5-1,
3-5-1.
then it says the town manager shall, so this would under paragraph A.
I don't have page, I'm sorry, there, I find it, yeah, okay. Got it, found it.
But how much would you strike there? How much of A?
I would have to review it, and if you don't
Okay,
mind,
all
I'd be
right.
happy to provide comment.
Right.
But I'm just raising that as a concern for disciplinary action. So I'm happy to comment on that. So I think my next couple of comments are going to kind of be intertwined, but staying on the same page, right under D, it states, "The manager's direction and supervision with the approval of the select board." So under D, it says, "Establish, reorganize, consolidate, or abolish under the town manager's direction and supervision." And what you'll see throughout this document, so I'm going to try to bundle a bunch of recommendations together, is that the charter explicitly outlines the roles and responsibilities of the finance department, the public works department, and the planning department. But, so those are defined, right? But it says here that the manager can establish, reorganize, or consolidate, or abolish any department or position. It should say, except for finance department, public works department, and planning department, because those are already pre-established in the charter. So it just lends itself to my recommendation that the functions of those three departments, those are operational and really should not be prescribed within the charter.
So on these provisions that deal with the town manager, if you could just, separate them out and send us your comment specifically,
Sure.
to be sure we get the wording correct. Thank you.
So again, just to encapsulate all of that, there's areas that speak to the credentials of the finance director and the DPW director, I think even the planning director, and then the functions of those departments. My recommendation to you will be that should all be removed from the charter, and it should be either embedded within a bylaw. The job descriptions that are already approved through Human Resources already have the credential requirements for departments. Why they are listed in the charter, again, makes it problematic from a human resource management standpoint. And then just to speak to that, if you look at the finance department, it speaks of a data processing function. I think we can all agree that's probably like 1980s, early 90s term that they use for computers. So we have an IT department that does, in theory, the data processing. So again, we'd be violating some of the language that's listed here.
Where was that found again?
So the finance piece is under 3-8-2.
Right.
Oh, we're jumping over that other stuff, okay. Got it.
Derek, isn't it the case that neither IT nor procurement presently functions within finance? So
That's correct.
if we got rid of the whole section, we wouldn't have to worry about it. But but at the very least, those two should be taken out because they don't report to finance, to the
Well,
director.
and again, you know, if there was a reorganization that were to take place, if it's embedded in the charter, I would have to figure out some way to change the charter, right? So we could do a review today, but technology changes, government evolves, and the way the charter is written, it doesn't allow, at least for those three departments, it doesn't allow for the evolution of government and to make those changes. And again, it goes back to my previous point where it states that the town manager can reorganize, organize, or abolish departments. So how can you make that statement, but then have the finance department, public works department, and planning department already prescribed?
Can you
So
imagine?
they contradict each other.
Can you imagine a situation in which, certainly not you, but any town manager could have a nefarious purpose if the departments of finance, public works, and planning were not in the charter? I'm just not clear what we're accomplishing.
By having them in the charter?
Yeah.
I don't either. I honestly don't know why they would be embedded in the charter. And so then I would say this then, if the commission believed for some reason, to your question, Larry, that those need to stay there, then why just them? Why not the fire department? Why not the police department? Why not the Department of Environmental Management? And the list goes on. Why not Inspectional Services Department? So I guess the question for you to consider is why just these three departments? And does it really make sense? And what limitations does it put on the town manager by prescribing to him or her what those department functions will be? I can tell you right now that there are things that I personally would like to reorganize that prevent me from reorganizing, and you pointed out one, procurement, to reorganizing because of how it's not listed. So again, something for you to consider. There's three, again, this is just unusual in my mind. It calls out specifically in this charter, the Board of Health, the Conservation, the Commission, the Development Industrial Commission, the Zoning Board of Appeals. So again, I would ask, why just those boards and committees? Why not the other 40? You know, so again, like form and function, consistency, these were certainly probably put in there for a reason. To Ms. Hall's point, there's a reason they were embedded there, but let's take a look at those if you could and determine what a better place those would belong.
This is on Section 11, Section 12, and 13, and
Section 7 is Board of Health, Section 10, 11, and 12 are the other three that I just pointed out.
is that including Section 13, or the scope of the Department of Planning and Development?
Yeah, so again, Bill, that's my all-encompassing comment or statement
Okay.
that the charter calls out planning department, the finance department, and the public works department, and their department heads. So explicitly states the finance director must have these credentials, the DPW director must have these credentials, which is really a job description function, not a charter review or charter function. You know, so again, just bringing those to your attention, you know, why don't we have the requirement for the credentials for the human resources director? Why only the DPW director? So again, there's a lot of inconsistencies with some of these items that I'm bringing to your attention.
So Derek, it would be very helpful if you took Chapter 3, which are all these different boards and departments that are under the town manager, and mark it up specifically. No, not marginal comment, but actually the actual word changes, and give it to us. We can work on it. That particular chapter seems to me that falls within the town manager. That would be very helpful. That after the comments you just made, then I don't, really, your next comment is at the end, right? You had one comment in Chapter 6. But if you helped us with the town manager chapter by
Yes.
marking it up, that would be helpful.
Do we have the charter in a Word document? Does anybody? have-
Yes.
Oh, we
Yeah.
do? Oh, could
Yeah.
you send that to me? Yeah, the reason the way it is, because I only had a PDF document, but yeah, I'm
Right.
happy to redline and make markups to a
That'd be
Word
excellent.
document. Yeah,
Thank
that'd be
you.
a lot easier.
It'd be very helpful if you show the current and then your proposed, so we can see what the difference is.
I think-
Yeah, so if I do a red line, you'll
Yep.
see the strikeouts
Right.
And then you'll
next to
see what
the
you propose.
current.
Okay, good.
Yep.
All right.
Yeah, that's, again, so I apologize, that's all I had to work with, so.
I think you had one more comment on 621. I didn't understand. You said it conflicted with section above. On page 25, 6-2-1.
Section 6? That's referendum.
It's section, yeah,
621.
it's the last page.
Right.
Page 25, the last page, under Chapter 6, Town Boards, Commissions, Committees, Department, and Division Heads. 621.
So I think what I meant here was that it says to the extent permitted by law, such powers which shall include the ability to appoint, discipline, or discharge an employee shall be subject to final approval by the town manager, without appeal or recourse to the select board, which goes back to my previous point, where it gives the select board 15 days to veto a disciplinary action. So I guess what I'm trying to say is on 6-2-1, I would agree with that language, only if you strike the previous language
Okay.
that gives, because they conflict, they contradict one another.
Right, got it.
Derek, you also noted, you were talking about the Director of Planning and Development. Is there clarity who appoints that person? I've heard variously the town manager in his ability to appoint, but also the planning board. Does that need clarification, or is that an HR question?
I think before I read the charter, it was my understanding that the town manager appointed the planning director, and right now, the select board have 15 days to rescind any town manager appointment. It wasn't until I read this that it suggests that the planning board also plays a role. So to your question, yes, I think it needs clarity, yes. Because if Lee Hartman were to retire tomorrow, I wouldn't know which course of action to take, to be honest with you.
Okay.
Right,
Thank you.
very good. Are there other questions, Betsy?
On page 17, it's section 14, the very last comment, is there such a thing? I'm not sure what you're referring to.
The whole commission?
It's page
Yeah, the committee.
17.
Is there, I didn't know if there was a land use and acquisition
Okay, so you
committee. I
didn't
actually
know.
double-checked that with Lee, and I think he said there is.
There is, yeah.
There is,
Yeah.
yes, just
Yeah.
that's what I
Right.
thought, okay,
But when I had marked this up, I wasn't sure, I was more or less asking a question.
right.
They're
To be honest
actually-
with you, I didn't know this was gonna be a public document when I was marking it up, but that's okay.
Okay.
Yeah, the land use and acquisition is, its principal charge is from a state requirement in Chapter 61, that we have some process to publicly look at a 61 to determine what to do next.
So it goes through that
That's what
committee.
the chapter, the land use and acquisition is committee's real big charge, is to keep an eye on Chapter 61s as they come into town. There's a committee that looks at them, and there's a public hearing over them. Obviously, internally, in the past, department heads and town managers have reviewed to see if this is a priority acquisition or should be thought about. But there was this committee that set up also to have a public discussion on it.
Got it, makes sense. And then section 11 is Development Industrial Commission.
Yeah, that should be out.
I did check with Lee, and he said there's no longer a commission.
Derek,
Okay.
just for historical purposes, there was a section there,
Right.
and a previous charter commission eliminated the section but chose not to eliminate the title.
I think it was the town clerk.
Yeah, no. So, I mean, there's nothing wrong with, I don't think that anybody expects to have another one of these, and if we do, it doesn't need to be a charter requirement.
Right.
So that's an easy one, I think.
Right.
You're suggesting just striking section 11? Sorry. Just strike section 11? Is that your suggestion, Larry?
Yeah, she's agreeing.
The title, right. Very good. Is that the extent of the comments?
So those are my comments.
Right.
I'm happy to reduce them to writing in a red line version, so you
That'd be
can,
very helpful,
you
thank
can
you.
see the changes. And, you know, I'll send that along through the chair.
Perfect.
And, you know, I'm happy to assist in any way that I can. If you've heard enough of me, I'm happy with that too. I have plenty of other things to keep me busy.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Bill, I've got a question.
Yep.
You know, talking about these other boards and appointees and stuff, in your past experience or your opinion, keep the planning board elected or have it also appointed? As I've looked at some other charters, I've seen some of their appointed planning boards and most, I think, are elected. But what are your thoughts on that?
That's a great question. So, you know, I agree that a lot of planning boards, most planning boards are elected planning boards. I would say this, just generally speaking, when you have appointed boards, and the Board of Health, I think I referenced in my comments, you can seek out those individuals that have that experience and that background. So if you had an appointed planning board, you could advertise for individuals who had like land use planning backgrounds, especially in a community this size. You have a wealth of knowledge in this community, and like I would say to all the departments, you know, we only hire the best and the brightest. And so I would say, you know, if we can do that for boards and committees, if we can find the best and brightest, it's only going to enhance the work that we do. So I think if you had an appointed board, you could identify those individuals that already come to the table with years of experience.
Well, as I say, I'm not necessarily advocating it, but just wanted to hear your opinion and thoughts, pros and cons. So, thank you.
Any other comments? Okay. Thank you very much, appreciate it.
I was just going to say one thing, Bill, and that is, thank you so much, Derek, this is wonderfully helpful. But also, if there are other departments, I mean, we did hear from some departments, but if there are other departments that have suggestions around the charter, we certainly would want to hear those.
I'll pass that along. All right, thank you.
Thank you, thanks very much.
Mr. Chairman, we have a question from Mr. Neville. Can he ask a question
We haven't had public comment yet. Do you have a question?
about?
Yes, quick. Peter, we have another item on the agenda starting, and they're already here. Thank you. Maybe you could ask him. Michelle, why don't we go ahead with Colin's team? Can you hear us, Michael and Pat? Okay, welcome.
Hello?
Thank you. Mike, we got your memo. It was circulated to the commission. It covers a couple of the points in the COPC. What we'd like to do is discuss the COPC and complete the discussion of the COPC, the rest of the points tonight, so that we can move to an actual draft provisions for the charter by our next meeting when we meet a week from tonight. And then I can trade drafts with you when you come back in 2 weeks, where we can put COPC basically to bed. And then immediately start on the Finance Committee. And as you pointed out, some of the COPC work is going to be very relevant to the Finance Committee, and the two have to work together. So do you want to make any opening comment before we dive into this?
Only that, you know, we are very, sorry, I hear an echo here. Just that we are very interested to get your feedback. I think, as I said at the prior meeting, you know, we're still learning how this committee or this commission rather, thinks and feels and operates. So with each one of these memos, we hope to get a little closer with our first attempts. So we fully expect that there'll be lots of comments on this, but we hope with the pieces that we have provided, we have at least a start point that everyone can use to bat around and see where we want to go. So, you know, we thought, as we noted in the last meeting and in the memo, that it would be really useful to try and use some charter text to really clarify what the vision for the role and mission of the COPC is. And so that's what that first attempt was. And we understand, you know, that this is, you know, when the charter was initially amended to include this, it was deliberately left a little bit vague so that it would have some room to grow and evolve and see what fit best. And that made sense then. And we hope that folks can agree that it probably makes some sense now to tighten up what its specific role is. So with that, you know, we'd love to hear your thoughts on it. Did we hit the mark? Did we miss the mark? What do you want to add? What do you think is not stated properly? What do you think of that first swing at text for the COPC?
Mike, thank you for the memo. We had a list of maybe 5 or 6 items that we had discussed would be part of the COPC's function. And I saw you drafted here a good general opening paragraph. That was the first paragraph that you put in your memo. And it's somewhat similar to what we had, but it's kind of a broad outline of the functions of the COPC. And then I see you also covered oversight, legislative oversight, and enforcement. Then there are a few items that aren't in here yet that can probably be dealt with pretty quickly, which was the recommendations to town meeting with respect to non-financial warrant articles, perhaps making appointments to the Finance Committee and other selected boards and committees. And we haven't covered yet actions in between town meetings and how much substance there will be of that. We can talk about the financial part too. I think you wanted to discuss that in conjunction with the Finance Committee. And the recommendation of a special town meeting to the select board with a 2/3 vote. So these are things that we could add to the functions. We could combine some of them in the same paragraph, I would expect. But I think the having the actual paragraphs are very helpful because then we can edit them and work out a process where you edit, we edit, and we end up gradually assembling a charter. And I think all of us would keep a working draft of the charter as it's being built, but I think the COPC would be the first major item. And then go to the Finance Committee. And in looking at the, just stepping back a minute, it seems to me that if we're going to make the schedule in September, that we have to continually, you know, step up our pace here. We need to finish the COPC basically by your return in 2 weeks. And be on to the Finance Committee, and then be ready to do the Select Board at the beginning of June, and move on to the Planning Board sort of in the mid-June. And even then, it's going to be ambitious, because we need to make room for some of the other provisions, obviously, that we deal with, like the master plan and so forth. So, having said that, open up to commissioners to ask you about your memorandum and the paragraphs you've already drafted. Anything about the COPC would be open game for comment. Bill?
No. The memo is very, very helpful where you open it up and talk about the possibilities of what may occur when it comes to legislative oversight, what may occur that stops an article from being fully executed. There's a whole series of legitimate reasons why an article might not be brought to fruition after an action of town meeting. The concern I had was that some deliberate neglect of an article or some political circumstance around an article You know, we had an issue here in Plymouth where we did have a town manager go before the Board of Selectmen in a public meeting and indicate that this is their warrant. Articles are placed on it, town meeting takes action, and if they did not want her to proceed, did not want the town manager to proceed on the article, that would be, you know, appropriate. And that's the thing that I'm quite worried about, because you outlined all these examples of why an article might not get executed. They're all very legitimate, they're there, I understand it. But the thing that I'm trying to figure out is, how do we assure that legitimate article gets executed and doesn't die on the vine? Just sit there, that there's no one, it is the selectmen's warrant, the town manager's there to implement it. What happens that event occurs? Did you take that under consideration at all, or your thoughts on that? How you address something like that?
Sure. So I appreciate those comments. And I think what we were trying to do is create a platform first where the discussions that would take place with both branches would give each branch, you know, a chance to explain, you know, what they see as the issue if something is not being implemented. So the town manager is there to explain the things you noted. The town clerk will be there as well. But at the end of the day, this subcommittee we proposed does have 3 members of the committee of precinct chairs. So this committee, you know, has the ability to raise the issues. And I guess even if we didn't have a majority, they could still, you know, raise issues. If after the initial discussion, all of the legitimate reasons that it have been ruled out, and then the multiple reporting timelines that we had built in, 100 days, 200 days, 300 days, should help the committee really raise to everyone's attention what's going on in the event that a particular article is not being implemented in the eyes of the members of the committee that are from the COPC in a way that they think is appropriate given what town meeting has directed. So that was our intent. Obviously, if folks feel that, you know, it needs to, there needs to be more on that front, we can look into it. I do think, as we've kind of talked about before, at some point the level of enforcement mechanism becomes a political one. But we could look and see what else we could put in there between what we have here now and an eventual political outcome with folks saying the Board of Selectmen or whatever other board or committee has not implemented the will of town meeting, we need to run against them and or recall them. I don't know, Pat, do you have other thoughts you want to add on that?
We also took a look at a memo back in January where one of the ways of dealing with this need to have oversight over town meeting warrant articles was to ask the select board to provide reports on a periodic basis of what's going on with this. So there's a whole range of options from, for example, this request for information that could be done wholly outside of the charter and not needing a charter process, to the process that we put forward for consideration, which is an information gathering process to winnow down reasons. And as Mike said, we can look into how much further. It sounds like you're looking for some further action to be taken once there's a deliberate attempt to stop, deliberate attempt not to enforce the town meeting warrant articles. And we can look into that a little bit more. But as Michael said, it is going to be a balance between the political option of, voting out somebody who's not going to go along with town meeting. And we can see what else has been done in other situations.
Don't want to politicize something. We want to depoliticize it. So that was the thought about, I looked at your suggestions. You are putting into place these scenarios of reporting that can act like the canary in the coal mine. Why is that thing not being done? The memo from January offers a solution to that, where it's quite transparent, where you can see the action and where it is along the way that can draw someone's attention to it. I was just trying to see if there was something out there that would give the committee of precinct chairs not only this legislative oversight to keep this tracking between themselves and the town, the Board of Selectmen, but if for some reason this article was stagnant, there would be some recourse to prompt people to bring it to fruition. Because, like I said before, I'm trying to depoliticize it. So once town meeting takes its actions, the public debate is over. Now it's time to execute the request of town meeting if it's legitimate.
Clerk?
I would make a distinction in my mind between a bylaw, all sidewalks must be 5 feet in width, where the select board tells or the town manager tells the DPW director to make a 6-foot sidewalk. Clearly, there has to be the ability, and I think the Committee of Precinct Chairs would be an excellent place for that. But my understanding is that in general, with legislatures and executives, the legislature says, we're providing X number of dollars for this project, and you may use this money to create the project, as opposed to you must. Do you know of any situation in where there is a you must do the project because we appropriated the money?
That's an interesting one, getting down in the weed there into the specific language about how the way that it is the funds are appropriated and how that determines it. I would want to check that one over with some other members of our team and see what we come up with. So I'll include that on notes for the next memo.
Yeah, it's interesting. Larry makes this point. Obviously, it's not a self-policing document, but it does require some checks and balances where somewhere out there, there's some response to that neglect by that branch. So it's obviously, it is a very interesting perspective that Larry puts out there. It's the dilemma that you find in the legislative process or the democratic process, but there should be something that we should look at to somehow be a catalyst to getting it done if it's a legitimate article sitting out there.
If I just might add, as was pointed out, there are as many ways to remedy the situation as there are the types of scenarios that arise. And a charter can't possibly anticipate all of the possible issues that are going to arise and give remedies to them. So one way is definitely the transparency issue of putting forward again and again where these things are, to narrow what the issues are that are stopping things from being implemented. But as was mentioned, a zoning bylaw is going to be different than is this budgetary item taken. Oftentimes at town meeting, what town meeting members are passing is the budget with a certain amount of money. And usually it's up to the individual department to implement that budget and those items. So, it's difficult to then move into the enforcement division. It's just a different issue. And I'm not sure the charter is going to be able to address every single one of those types of scenarios.
Betsy? Betsy, then
Thank you
Leslie?
so much. I've given this a lot of thought over the last week, and the words power and authority were used somewhat last week. And I really know that there's no power or authority that the COPC is going to have over the executive branch. And I realize that that's not what we're looking for. What we're really looking for is respect, cooperation, and partnership. That's what we're really looking for. We're not looking to force someone to do something. We're looking to have a partnership, an equal partnership of the legislature with the executive branch. And so I've tried to think about how that could happen. How can we, you can't force a partnership. But I'm just going to give you an example. The town meeting just passed a fur ban. No fur can be sold in the town of Plymouth. But if the executive branch and the departments decide not to enforce that, then it, fur could consider, I'm just using that as an example, by the way, could continue to be sold, even though our bylaw says it can't be sold. Somebody has to enforce it. Somebody has to go and make that happen. And there are a lot of laws like that, speed limit laws or whatever they are. So if town meeting says this is what we want this speed limit, or we want this bylaw, this ban, or whatever it is, like we banned places that sell cats and dogs. Well, if the place started to sell cats and dogs and there was no enforcement, how does town meeting say, we want this enforced, for example, as a partnership, not to take power over them, but to be respected and to have their cooperation and their partnership. So I just want to be clear that that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for that opportunity.
Yeah, and, going off of that a little bit, the respect is, I really shy away from the word power for the COPC, but one of the words I'd like to, I think respect is the right word. What came out of a lot of talking to people about forming this charter is that the populace really feels that the legislative branch meets twice a year, and what we're trying to do, what I'm trying to do, is take this COPC and let it be a legislative branch 365 days out of the year. I see the COPC having, like, meetings with the selectmen's, at least, quarterly, or working together, like, like Betsy said. I think that, that we need to find a way to get COPC some respect. And to Bill's point about making sure that stuff gets done, one of the things that I saw happen is we created a new position for an electrician, an in-house electrician. And when asked about it, the DPW director said, "Oh, that wasn't filled." And that's one of those things where I think if someone was minding the store, for lack of a better term, that someone would say that this was important to town meeting because we keep spending all this money on an outside electrician. Why wasn't it, filled? And, I think that there needs to be some kind of communication between the executive branch and the legislative branch, where the legislative branch says, this is really important. And the executive branch has to say, oh, okay, I know town meeting just approves that money, but I think there's certain things that, town meeting really feels is important. And I think that COPC needs to be able to have the respect of the executive board that they bring them. Thank you.
Larry?
I like you used the word transparency. The word I was looking for, I think, was sunlight. One of the things that will accomplish, I think, what wrestling is talking about is if the COPC says, okay, we funded an electrician, why isn't there an electrician? Maybe there's a reason, but the sunlight is expressing it and asking the executive branch to give an answer to that on an ongoing basis, this quarterly idea. It's not even a matter of enforcement. It's a matter of, if it's in the charter that this is the job of the COPC, that they state it out loud, that the newspaper and social media, whatever is the public way of getting information out, these are going to be methods that accomplish the best that we can, because I'm not sure that, we can say you must just because we gave you the money, but we can say, why didn't you? And they pretty much have to answer if they're going to at least appear to be responsive to the public.
Mike, could you zero in on that point, because, you know, I think this would be a great source of displeasure when, for example, a neighborhood gets its town meeting members together in behalf of perhaps a paving of a piece of dirt road, and they get other town meeting members to vote for it, and it passes town meeting over the objection, perhaps of the select board, or for whatever reason, but town meeting has spoken. They believe that road should be paved. The case was made by the citizens that it ought to be paved. And I think following town meeting, there is that great expectation that it will be paved, and that the DPW director is not going to say, well, I've decided I'm just not going to pave that road. I have other priorities. I mean, I don't think that's the way it's supposed to work. So there has to be some sort of obligation to carry out the vote of town meeting, more than just saying, here's the money, spend it if you want to. It's got to be, here's the money, spend it as we've directed and authorized, unless there's some strong reason not to.
Yeah, let me talk.
Go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
I think we're getting to it here. I think this discussion is getting to what I'd taken a few notes here, is that what we want is a clearer delineation of the interaction allowed or insisted upon for the COPC in their relation with the select board. Perhaps guaranteed meetings. I know that later on in this material here, it talks about quarterly reports, but that's not sufficient. It's good for them to have the opportunity, that is the COPC, to go before the select board on a regular basis and give their, state of the town meeting, so to speak. But they should also have the right somehow, perhaps through a vote of the COPC, 50+1 or 2/3, to bring matters to the board and be guaranteed that they can bring them forward if they feel that there's such urgency. And we've seen that recently, and we've seen them denied that ability to express the will of town meeting, or the potential will. So I think we're getting to it. We want, I don't want to speak for the commission, but I think we want more clearly stated that they have the right to bring that sunlight, as Larry said, into the room that both of them are sitting in.
Yeah, I just wanted to piggyback on all of that conversation. One of my biggest frustration with town meeting and with COPC is there's so many articles where I've gotten up or someone's gotten up and asked a question, and town meeting doesn't demand an answer. There's nothing, there's been times where, I remember when I was the first town meeting member, somebody got up and asked the chief, how much does it cost to roll your trucks? And he hemmed and hawed and said, well, I'd have to look it up. And I was new to town meeting and not as verbal as I am now, but I wanted to get up and say, then we're not voting on this until you give us the answer. And so many times at COPC, we've gone to the select board and asked a question, and they said, thank you for your comment. And I think that's one of my hugest frustrations with our current form of government is the legislative branch has no authority they don't use their authority. There are times where we should, as town meeting, say, look, you can't bring us this on 0 hour and we're not being able to vet it. We're not voting on it. I've pleaded with town meeting to use that authority, but I think that's something we really need to look at is, with the respect of, okay, COPC is coming to the select board with issues that they have all talked about and have said this is important. There has to be something that says, okay, COPC is not going to bring this to the rest of the town meeting unless you answer these questions. I just think that's an important part that, you need to be able to get answers.
David?
Well, I think you hit upon it, Rustling. There are powers in existence, and unfortunately, they're not being used. And that's a shame, because you could have questioned that very item, but we know what you're talking about. I think that the overwhelming thing here is we want to stop things from falling through the cracks, okay? It's fine, using the example of paving the road, it's fine to say, okay, we're holding up the paving of the road because we know next year the gas company's gonna put a new gas line in, okay? That's a legitimate thing. But there are other things that just get kind of like put in the background. And I wasn't aware until tonight, which I'm not a town meeting member and I'm not a selectman anymore, but I wasn't aware that money was appropriated for an electrician, an in-house electrician. Why not? That's the type of thing that should be addressed. Why not? We should have an in-house person.
So are you suggesting there be two levels, kind of like, something that's really important to the COPC? COPC says, we really meant that. It sort of underlined to the select board. You can't
I
ignore us
leave
in
it
this
to the
one.
professionals to come up with a wording for that,
Right.
I definitely, I don't want to use the word power, but I think the word respect is a better word. But I think that, as I've said before, I've gone before the select board on behalf of the COPC and pretty much told I was an advisory board to sit down and be quiet. And I think it is a respect thing that you're looking for.
Okay, Betsy?
Respect and partnership. And there's a curious thing that I sometimes hear and even see on social media. Well, we want to hear from residents, as though town meeting members are not residents. Like, I'm a resident, just like everybody else. And yet, if someone comes to the select board who doesn't normally talk to the select board and isn't a town meeting member, they get more respect than an elected town meeting member. So like, oh, you're a town meeting member, we don't care about you. And I'm not saying that happens all the time, but it certainly happened in that particular case. You came as a resident as well as a COPC member. And listening to residents is something some of the select board talks about a lot, but they don't see us as residents, so it's sort of weird. But I want to give you another example. I was chairman of the Open Space Committee, I think about 8 years ago. And since, at that time, the 5 or 6 years I was chairman, and since then, land has been put into conservation. So I went to the last Open Space Committee meeting, and during public comment, I said, have all of those tax title properties been put into conservation yet? And the tax planner said, no, they have not been put into conservation. Now, when town meeting voted on putting those tax title properties into conservation, they expected that they would be put into conservation, but they have not. And that's over maybe a 10-year period that a number of properties have been voted by town meeting to be put into conservation. And by that, I mean, it has not been recorded on the deed. And until it's recorded on the deed, even though it may be legally in conservation, it's just in somebody's memory that it's in conservation. That, in other words, if town meeting voted for that in 2010, and in 2025, nothing has happened, the town could sell that property and nobody would even remember it was supposed to be in conservation. So that's one example, and I think it's a very important example of town meeting doing something, expecting an action, and the action doesn't happen. Thank you.
Well, if I may say in defense of the Open Space Committee, I was going to say they completely agree, and they've been working on it.
Yes, that's right, that's
Well,
certainly
I think-
true.
Yeah.
And
Let's,
so this is something that the
yeah.
executive
Bill,
branch,
come
nothing
in.
to do with Open Space Committee.
Bill's going to make a comment,
Yeah.
and then I
I
want to
just-
ask
just-
Mike Ward for a reaction.
Okay, so just to comment on that question down at the other end of the table, that when what town meeting was doing was moving the parcel into the care and protection of conservation, which falls under Article 97, and now it is protected because of the act of town meeting. As long as it gets the designation that it's under the care and protection of conservation, the other next step would to actually put a conservation restriction on the land and then find a nonprofit entity to have the burden of enforcement of that restriction on that land. And to do something like that, you have to go through EOEA, and it takes a lot of work to get that done. But there is a simple act of protecting the parcel. They should be moved into the care and protection, because the town does, down at the assessor's office, they'll say how the land is held. Is it held by the school department, the finance department, or general purpose by the Board of Selectmen? You want to get it out of general purpose and get it over to that identification. I just want to say this has been a very interesting conversation, because the Conley group has outlined legitimate reasons why something might not make it over the goal line after town meeting. But then, I've always said, what is the canary in the coal mine? I think the better way of expressing that is what Larry Pizer is saying, that we need to shine light on it and have some transparency about where this article is at its current status. And then looking to continue with that transparency, that it is a public way of identifying each article and the status of each article. That reporting process might, that's outlined in the proposal, could be that opportunity that Frank speaks about, where the Committee of Precinct Chairs has a scheduled meeting with the selectmen to go over that document. So now we're creating this respect that we're looking for to identify why these things haven't happened. It might be the direction to go in where we're not, it's not a power thing or trying to breach the power of the Board of Selectmen. It's really looking for that respect and that cooperation to get an answer of why this article hasn't been fulfilled. There was an article, put money aside, hire an electrician. It hasn't happened. We're not getting an answer. So we need to build into the system something in the charter that says how that communication will occur and how that record keeping is going to occur. Obviously, in the end, it's going to require cooperation and trust to get that article finished if it's out there and it needs to be dealt with. Thank you.
So what do you think? You hear what the commission's coming to a consensus. Is there something we can draft that's going to be able to express this? David?
Yeah, I think,
Wait,
Well, if I could just add to some of the comments of the colleagues. First of all, I think Collins did a terrific job with this memorandum. It was a discussion document, and a lot of the language is off to a great start. I had thoughts about this. I like the idea of the Warrant Oversight Committee, and specific comments I want to pass along is, instead of the 100 days, 200 days, 300 days, which look like just a lot of potential work and not aligning with things, perhaps changing it to that 1 month prior to every town meeting, that a report on the status be provided to the Warrant Oversight Committee, or however we do it. I don't want to create more work for town folks, but I want, if this report is to go to representative town meeting and be done in a timely way prior to the town meeting, that report be provided, including, the electrician, and the departmental operation, but also capital projects. Because it can be briefly say an architect's been hired, or the construction is 20% complete. But I think a reasonable time requirement for that report makes sense, and I'm not sure the 100, 200, and 300 days make sense. Just
Okay.
wanted to pass that along. But it's a very good start, so I commend, the whole memorandum, but I thought that was a nice way to sort of outline the kind of report we're looking for.
very good. Go ahead, Mike. Just one comment I had. The special town meeting shouldn't be, I don't think should be any different than annuals. You can have a project that's just as important in a special as you would an annual, that people want to know what happened to it. So I would treat them equally.
Right, that was my intent also in my comment. Any town meeting.
okay, I think we are hearing some consensus and some around a couple of pieces of change to the warrant article oversight committee, including changing the timelines and potentially trying to build in meetings with the select board somehow around the report's issuance as a more operational mechanism of raising these issues and keeping the sunlight on, to use others' words. I also do want to loop back to what we tried to do at the very first paragraph, because I think maybe we didn't get there, but what we were trying to do with that new first paragraph does go right to the word that I think Commissioner Hall started with, which was respect and partnership, and recognizing the co-equal nature of the branches. We were trying, and maybe we should even simplify further our new 2, 3, 4. where we start out by saying the committee of precinct chairs described in section 2-11-4 shall function as a standing committee of town meeting whose purposes are to provide legislative branch continuity between town meetings. And then we go on. Maybe we should just put a hard stop after continuity between town meetings, period, as a first sentence. We can rearrange the rest of it to keep what's in there, to really try and emphasize to everyone reading the charter that the intent of this committee is really to be that legislative branch continuity, that voice for the legislative between town meetings, and that it should be treated with respect as representatives of representative town meeting. That's sort of, I think, where we're partially trying to go with that, but I'm taking from the discussion that you would like it even clearer or stronger in constructing this committee's purpose. How does that sound? Should we strengthen that first, that 2, 3, 4, and then add, or I should say, edit the warrant article advisory committee so that the timelines are different, and try and construct in some select board meetings around those reports?
Right.
Yeah,
I think this part of the charter is extremely important. I mean, this is kind of the essence of, to think where a lot of people are involved and think we can improve the charter. If we can get the right relationship with the COPC, with the other ongoing functions, I think we'll accomplish a lot. If you could, even though you don't come to our next meeting, Mike, if we could work, I'll work with you, if you could work with us with another draft that we can have in between now and next week, that fleshes this out a little further. The two paragraphs that you've already worked on. In this first paragraph, we also might add a few of the functions that we wanted the COPC to be picking up, like the appointments, the recommendation of articles. I mean, there are some of those things that could be put in. Nothing much needs to be said about them except express them. Is that within the realm of possibility?
Sure. I mean, I think we'd love to spend a little time, if there is possible here, clarifying. We had a couple questions on some of the part of the reason we didn't address the other bullets is we didn't get them in the last meeting. In part is because on some of them we had some questions for the commission. And I mean, to go straight to it, a lot of those tie to the role of COPC in its relationship with the FinCom. And we were starting to look as a team at the FinCom language in the charter, and we realized there's a couple places the FinCom language diverges from common FinCom language. So we really wanted to understand better from the commission how the FinCom operates within the town, what's working, what's not working. I know, actually, I should stop saying FinCom, Advisory and Finance Committee. Because that will help us figure out how to navigate some of the items on this that seem to, some seem to go to COPC, some seem to go to advisory, and some might, have a role for both. And you also had referenced in those bullets having the COPC being partially in charge of appointing FinCom. And so that was, we were trying to understand a little bit better how advisory and Finance Committee operates within Plymouth, so that we could kind of make sense of what we were seeing in the charter and connect that to where you want to go with COPC.
Bill, you're a fan of the FinCom?
Fan of the FinCom. Well, that's one of my greatest concerns, is that we have a finance committee or an entity reviewing the budget as it's built over a period of time, eventually taking it up at the larger body of town meeting. So I'm an advocate of town meeting members being on the finance committee. And I think that's important. And then there was the thought process around the finance committee and when they will be part of that process. The town manager is going to have to build a budget directed by the Board of Selectmen, but FinCom should be included in that process as they start to work with department heads. There's currently, right now, with our Finance Committee, subcommittees that meet with different departments as they build their budgets. But right now, it's at kind of the tail end of that whole process. So they're only getting, a subcommittee is meeting with departments and getting a debriefing of what they're proposing and what has already been constructed and built. So the thought process is on two levels. One, making sure we have a FinCom that's made up of town meeting members, and getting them involved in the building of a budget over a period of time with the town manager and department heads, as instructed by the selectmen. The selectmen give direction to the town manager starts to build a budget with department heads, and it's important that the FinCom is part of that process.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, we also talked about limiting FinCom to warrants that had to do with the budget. You know, we talked about, giving COPC the other stuff, the fur and the and other stuff that would free them up to, really dive into the budget. I think that's an important distinction, because I really think that, that would be good.
Two comments. One is, someone has to be the arbiter of what a financial article is. I don't think we ever just said the budget. I mean, of the capital has to be, if somebody has an article that has financial implications. So, I mean, my thought is that if we're keeping this within the legislative branch, the moderator seems to be a possible person to say, this article goes to this committee, this article goes to that committee. That is,
What if we had the three chairs make kind of a decision? I mean, the chair of COPC, moderator, and
that's fine.
So Larry,
Also-
can you clarify that? Because obviously, articles raised and appropriate, that would be clearly a FinCom oversight. What other article? An article that was,
All of your articles?
well, what? The Community Preservation Committee articles have a funding source, which is the Community Preservation Act. We actually looked into it, and we didn't even have to go to FinCom, but 20 years ago, we decided it was in our best interest to get in front of FinCom. And I had a chairman of the FinCom at that time saying, what is the CPC doing in front of me? I only take up raise and appropriate. So I'm
Okay.
trying to figure out, when you say that, what articles are you speaking of directly?
Well, I mean, that,
Okay.
to me, what you just said is the exact problem, because
Okay.
I don't have an answer to what is, and if I did have an answer to what is now, I don't know that that answer would apply next year. So it just seems like Bill's idea of, a board to funnel out these articles to where they belong, that seems like a
So
useful
it sounds like
idea.
wouldn't some citizen
Yep.
think that the CPC has a reserve of money that basically came from the taxpayers?
Right.
And it's to be used for housing and open space and
Right.
historic, for the purpose of the good of the people of the town. I mean, it's not like it's a total self-sufficient, that we want a tree somewhere.
No, but when the voters went to the polls and they voted to pass the Community Preservation Act, they established this revenue stream for those three distinct purposes.
Okay,
So
and
when I went to FinCom, the chairman said, what am I entertaining these articles? They're not raising and appropriating. That question is already done. Now you're just making the recommendations. I said, I think it's important that we go before FinCom. But maybe it's an act between FinCom and the chairman of the Finance Committee to determine what will be heard by the two.
Well, that to me is the question. How do we assign articles? One other point before we leave this FinCom matter. There's a discussion of FinCom being less powerful because they come in late in the budgetary process. I might give a counter thought that makes them more powerful, because it is the FinCom's motion that goes before town meeting.
We should
And
change that.
therefore, when we're talking about who is making, what does FinCom do? As of now, FinCom presents the budget to town meeting. There can be other people to propose amendments. The select board in particular can do that. Town meeting representatives can do that. But FinCom's pretty powerful in terms of their ability to make the motion.
Frustrated by the subcommittee process. They like their subcommittee process. They go out and they meet with department heads, but one of the number one complaint coming from the finance subcommittee process is that they are kind of introduced at the end of the process. So they were looking for a little bit earlier introduction to that process. I think Betsy wants to talk.
Thank you. First of all, I 100% agree with Bill that we need town meeting members on the Finance Committee, or Advisory and Finance, whichever it is. I think that many town meeting members are much more knowledgeable about town finances. Some of them have been town meeting members for 20, 30 years. They have a lot more knowledge than some of the advisory and finance people, particularly people who have just recently been appointed. And many town meeting members have also been on a number of committees over a number of years. So there's a lot of inside knowledge that town meeting members have. And I certainly think that, we definitely need town meeting members on advisory and finance. To the point of which articles go before finance, you probably know more about this than we do, but there are a number of towns right now who have finance committees that do not hear all the articles. And so we might learn from the other towns how they decide which from those towns, which articles get heard by finance and which don't, because I know when I was doing research on charters, there are towns that for a long time have had just a finance committee. And as to Bill's point about getting in early on the action, I think I need, as a town meeting member, more information than I'm getting from advisory and finance. And I think if we had town meeting members who were in on the process early and really understood how the budget for that department was being built, that they could bring that information to town meeting in a way that we're not getting that information now. So those are some of my thoughts on that.
Okay. So there you have it, Mike.
Thank you. Those are some very helpful background thoughts, both substantive and perspectives on what's working and what's not working. I think, one thing that's interesting is because you've constructed this new COPC, that does play a lot of the role that some FinComs do in other communities. That I think is part of why there's this interesting question of which articles would go where. In most places, there is no COPC or nothing like what you've got. It really is the FinCom that either handles all articles or all finance articles, depending. And really, the whole concept of FinCom, which came about in the early mid 20th century, there was actually one or two in the late 19th century, but mostly in the early 20th century, was that as finance was getting more complicated, there was no standing committee of town meeting. There was no voice for town meeting as a check on the executive in between town meetings. And so having a finance committee who could speak for the legislative and develop the budget the way a legislative should was kind of how they evolved, which is also why FinComs end up with the reserve fund as opposed to a piece of the executive. But in many other, we'll look at this, but I think in most other representative town meeting towns, there is no prohibition on representative town meeting members being on FinCom. I do think that that can help in terms of linking knowledge that that representative town meeting members have developed over their time on it with the needs of what FinCom needs to do to understand really complicated departmental operations and budgets. I guess one other question that I have in the back of my mind is 15 is a huge, well, not huge, I guess there are others that are bigger, but it's a relatively large committee. And because you've excluded representative town meeting members, does the moderator have challenges filling that? Are there frequent vacancies, or is it still a pretty actively, competed for or applied for committee?
application process. People apply, vacancies come available, he moves them into the position. So he has done an excellent job over the years filling those positions. The idea, though, around a different, I wouldn't shy away from the moderator still playing a role in picking members of the FinCom. I was going to think that 5 of them would come from the moderator, 10 would come from precinct chairs chosen as town meeting members. So there'd be 10 town meeting members appointed by the committee of precinct chairs to serve on town meeting, FinCom, and so the moderator would come in and choose 5. This would also, after talking to some members of the FinCom, they were concerned about a member who's elected to town meeting, who does not get reelected, and cannot be on the FinCom. And this reserves the moderator finding an opportunity to take that institutional knowledge and keep it on the FinCom by appointing them, because he has appointing power. So there was a thought there that we didn't want to lose a finance committee member with a great institutional knowledge. Like Betsy Hall has indicated, some of these people that are involved in the process have gained a great deal of knowledge over a period of time of how the town works. So it would be something of that nature, where the moderator is participating in that process. He appoints 5 people at large across the town, and that the precinct chairs would be identifying 10 town meeting members to serve in that capacity. Right now, our language says that we can't have more than 3 town meeting members from one precinct, and that's just so that one side of town doesn't get overrepresented. So we would keep the language pretty much the way it is in terms of the size.
We may want to start slower and have less town meeting members on the FinCom and have more finance, you know, in other words, the balance would be kind of the opposite, just to see how it works.
I think that one of the charges that I have taken on as a charter committee member is that I don't want to tweak this charter. I want to really put the patient on the table. We've got to find a way to make town meeting form of government work. And one of the most important things that I've seen over a period of time is making sure that town meeting members have a healthy debate, a knowledgeable debate about that budget, the budget process, and what they're voting on. And the only way for that to happen is to get town meeting members actually serving on this finance committee. And this, by osmosis, would create a higher level debate on town meeting floor when it came to discussing an article. We get frustrated at town meeting where, arguing over lawnmowers, and that's because I believe that the town meeting members are not as engaged as FinCom members. I've watched this process now for 20 years because I've been presenting these articles, and I see this enormous work that the FinCom does, subcommittees, discussions, meeting till 10 o'clock at night. Then they put a book together and send it over to the town meeting members, and it's hard to decipher and understand, and the moment is lost. I need to find some way of creating a healthy level of information on town meeting floor when it comes to creating, building a budget, and voting on that budget eventually. It's unheard of for a legislative body to appropriate $260 million in taxpayers' money and have the limited interaction in the budget process that we currently have. And if town meeting is to survive as a form of government, we need to address that issue.
Yes, wrestling.
Not to get into the discussion of FinCom, but it does have enormous power. It does run town meeting. I've had this discussion with every FinCom member I've ever talked to. They run town meeting. And one of the things that I, talked to my new town meeting members, and the biggest thing that they said was every single article coming from FinCom was 1300. And their comment was, are they discussing this? Are they having a good discussion? And they really don't see it. And I think that's something that the town as a whole has really, seen is, okay, FinCom, every article. And I've had a couple town meeting members come up to me about different articles that, it was 13,004 something, and it had nothing to do with finance. And they really, I give them their due. I think FinCom does a lot of work, But I think that, you know, there needs to be some way that we integrate town meeting into this, because I think that Bill's right. I think that, you know, I want to take, for lack of a better term, power away from FinCom and power away from the moderator, because it's got to be given back to the legislative branch.
I think David Peck?
Just want to clarify, our current charter precludes town meeting members from being,
Yes.
being part of it. And I agree with Betsy and others that they should be allowed.
Should be allowed.
They should be allowed to be part of it, but,
Right.
but, yeah,
Seems to
but,
be
you
a
know, but, you know,
consensus.
not precluded, but I also don't want to mandate that they
The
be
question
town
is just the
meeting members.
balance.
Yeah, just want to clarify.
Yeah.
Talk about Bill?
I go back to what wrestling is indicating, that the FinCom is a committee that does a lot of work. They are hardworking, they take on a great challenge, but the institutional knowledge of that board over a period of time is not building like a snowball. And I think that if you have the town meeting members participating in this process, you have that institutional knowledge building over a period of time, so that you don't have the votes where everybody's voting yes, and in that these people that are sitting year after year on FinCom are sitting through the debate at town meeting and are going to ask those tougher questions, and you might have a different opinion coming out of that. I truly, truly believe that it has to be 10-5. It has to be a majority of town meeting members on this board. It's unheard of a board making a decision on $260 million that is not engaged fully in the budgetary process. And that's what I say, that we shouldn't be tweaking this charter. We should be aggressively going after town meeting to see how we can make it more accountable, more transparent, and functioning at a higher level.
Okay. So back to you, Mike. There was one question I had on the oversight. I think the COPC's Legislative Oversight Committee suggested a single person with a warrant article sponsor be the point person for pursuing the legislative oversight and identifying where it is at any stage in time. Is that still a viable proposition, or is that not necessary? I guess that's a question for you, Bill.
Say that again, Bill?
I think you had the original sponsor of the article being responsible for taking it through the process of the oversight, making these periodic reports and how the article's been doing and so forth.
It's interesting, the town manager was here tonight talking about technology and how it might serve the institution of Plymouth over a period of time. Now we're into the year 2022. We have the ability to have that sunlight, as Larry has indicated. I have been thinking about that you have a document that the sponsor of any article that passes is required to report on the status of that article. So if someone was to recommend an article to town meeting, sponsor an article, the article goes to town meeting, it passes, that entity that recommended the article or the sponsor of the article would be required to go to this online document
Right,
and
that's what it
fill in
says.
the
Yep.
status of that article over a period of time. Is that what you were asking me about? Bill? Is that what you were asking me about? I was asking you a question, Bill. Was that what you were asking me
Yeah,
about?
that's right.
Okay.
That's what you said in your memo here.
Yep.
Yep. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground, but we're still in those two paragraphs, and then expanding them to pick up these other items in the COPC list.
Yep, we will attempt to integrate all of these pieces that that there seems to be consensus around. So that includes the items we said before about adding select board COPC meetings to the timeline, editing the timeline, engaging somehow the sponsor of the article into that process, tightening up the COPC's mission, and then potentially adding in some of the additional functions we haven't covered yet. Although we can put them in. We still, I think, would like to have a little discussion about some of these other bullets, but we can certainly put them into the next iteration and then discuss them. At
Got
our
into the
next
Finance
time.
Committee tonight, which is great that we're beginning to move into that item as well.
Mhm.
Okay,
Yep.
any other comments from the commission?
I had one last comment, just because Larry, indicated that, if there was a type of article that Committee of Precinct Chairs would take up, and a type of article that the FinCom would take up, that, the FinCom would be taking up any article that raised or appropriated, and that the Committee of Precinct Chairs would take up zoning and bylaws, as Betsy has talked about the fur bylaw as an example, that might be better suited for the Committee of Precinct Chairs.
Right, so
That's probably
many-
how we could divide it up.
Right. So many charters we looked at, the Finance Committee only deals with financial articles, so that there must be definitions out there that work. I mean,
We can look at that.
I've read
yep.
several charters where they make that distinction between the Finance Committee only reviewing financial articles. Perhaps there are definitions that go with it.
And I just wanted to bring up that there are some charters that specifically have a bylaw committee that deals with bylaw changes. And I did have a couple of questions that I just wanted to think about, and maybe we can provide answers online, through our further discussions. But first of all, if the Advisory and Finance Committee became more representative of town meeting, had town meeting members on it, and possibly had either certain precinct representatives or appointments by the precinct representatives, would it still be as important to have the precinct chairs handle some of the topics while the Finance Committee just stuck to the finances? Because I feel like you may be helping, you may be solving some of the issues you're trying to work on if the Finance Committee, the Advisory and Finance Committee had more representation. That's my first question. And the second question that I did want to ask about your charter, and we can do this offline as well, but there are two provisions that are somewhat contradictory in how you establish your Committee of Precinct Chairs. So when we start talking about building a Finance Committee or building a Warrant Review Committee, we need to understand the timeline. Now, I understand that, there's an election, and then within 20 days of an election, the precincts meet to choose precinct chairs. And then either 30 days or 45 days after the election, the Committee of Precinct Chairs starts to meet. So you have one of your charter provisions, 211.4 says 45 days, and 235 says 30 days. Can you tell me how specifically that process happens? Because we need to figure out if there's going to be appointments to a warrant review oversight committee or to Finance Committee. Where in the process is this going to be happening?
Okay, any comment? It seems to me the way the moderator makes the appointments to the Finance Committee seems to be always doing it in June or July. I mean, in that same time frame following the election.
Right, I mean,
So-
as far as FinCom is concerned,
Right.
that's July 1st to June 30th. But Russell, correct me if I'm wrong, the Committee of Precinct,
They're doing this-
sometimes, the Committee of Precinct Chairs,
Follows the election.
it's no later than, and the Committee of Precinct Chairs forms really quite quickly after town meeting. It's going to be interesting this year, where we have a town meeting 20 minutes after the election,
Yeah,
but,
exactly.
But that sounds like it would work, because the committee would be in effect to make the appointments to the Finance Committee.
right, but I mean, you have 20 days from the time the town election occurs until there has to be a caucus of each of the precincts, and that caucus elects the chair. And then, very soon after that, the Committee of Precinct Chairs starts to function again.
Yeah. I'm not sure on the actual date on that, but it is, like last Thursday after,
Right.
the third Thursday after that 20 days
I
would
really
would be
think we
the
could
first
work out
town meeting.
the dates, but it's all taking place in late May and June, before July 4th.
Bill? Bill?
Well, in any event, you might want, when you're looking at the charter, we should look at resolving the conflict between the one provision that says 30 days and the other that says 45. It doesn't matter which one it is, but currently those two provisions contradict each other.
It's true.
Yep.
Bill?
Yes.
The standing COPC is in force right up until Election Day. And then it's only maybe 30 days between the election and when we have a new COPC that has been formed. So any advisory and finance committee vacancies can be filled right up until the day of the election. So, and those appointments don't go away because of the election, I wouldn't think, right? We don't have to suddenly appoint a new committee, because wouldn't those continue to stand? I mean, I think that's a good question anyway, but I would recommend that even though the COPC may have some new members, it typically isn't a majority of new members. But, well, yes, every 10 years, but we would want a provision that whoever was on the finance committee, say it's a finance committee, that they continue on until the new committee of precinct chairs meets. Or, I mean, I think there needs to be a way that there's a transition between the committee of precinct chairs before the election and after the election in terms of the appointment. I would think that you would continue on advisory and finance or finance, even if there is a new COPC. Am I making any sense?
I really think that, we're only really beginning to think about this tonight and how these dates fit with each other. But if we sit down in a room and have a half an hour, I think we can work out a timetable that works.
Yeah, and I don't think we have to scrap the whole advisory and
really just
finance
a
committee every
fine-tuning.
time we have an
But,
election.
doesn't the FinCom have, 3-year overlapping terms, and where COPC is just, every year?
Right.
So-
That would have to be decided if we're going to put that in this
Right.
charter too, yeah.
So so it would be the 3 years, because that's what you get out of a town meeting member, their lifespan, possibly.
I think,
But you may have turnover in the COPC
right,
leadership.
I think the point is that FinCom has a 3-year term.
Correct.
COPC realistically has a year term. It's usually the same people who are at COPC, but it could
Got it.
turn over. I think
Okay.
that's something we need to look at.
Okay, good. All right, thank you.
Any other comments? Okay. So we will work in between now and next meeting, Mike, by phone and by online. And then we'll see you folks in 2 weeks.
Sounds good. We appreciate it. It's good discussion tonight. Thank you for your time, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Great, thank you very much for zooming in tonight. I think we've got more ground covered, and we look forward to again seeing you 2 weeks, but talking to you certainly in the meantime.
Sounds good.
So we're just going to continue on with the end of our agenda here. Michelle, do we have any public comment by Zoom? Any public comment here? Mr. Neville?
Thank you. I'm Peter Neville, town meeting member from Precinct 10, and thank you for your hard work. What a great discussion tonight. What a privilege it was to sit here and watch and listen. It's just wonderful. I have some concerns about the structure of the charter, and I feel like that someone with an editorial point of view, a strong editorial point of view, could balance the sections so that, for instance, if you look at section 3-6.2-2, it says the DPW shall And then if you look down at 3-8-2 and look at the Director of Finance, you don't see any subsections. You might have a colon and then a bunch of subordinate phrases that run on with commas. And you'll find that if you even go, you could just pick a section at random and compare it to another section, and you'll find that the use of letters or numbers or the absence thereof in just a paragraph return, that it should all be the same.
I agree. Yep.
Okay? Now, I'd like you to take a look at Section 5.6-3, which deals with the Select Board bringing questions or bringing referendum questions to the ballot.
Right.
And what I find there is that the ease at which the Select Board can bring a question, a referendum question, to the ballot, when I measure the ease that they have to do that versus the weight that's put upon John Q. Public to bring a question to the ballot. There are days, there are numbers of signatures, there are percentages of voters, there are all kinds of measures that
Peter.
have to be met.
Peter, if I could, that's simply copying state law.
Well, I suggest it might be challenged,
Well-
just as we challenge the conflict of interest law in
No,
our charter.
But I mean, we could do more, but we can't do less than what's there.
Well, perhaps we should hold the Select Board to the same standard. Just saying, just saying.
I think this is a matter for our legislative delegation.
I really like the discussion on the CPCC and bring some powers to them. I guess lastly, in section 3-5-1, in the midst of that very long paragraph, we find that the town manager appoints the town clerk. Anyone that's read the charter more than once realizes that the town clerk has a significant role in this government.
And what was your suggestion?
3-5-1.
No, I've got it at 351, but what provision?
Well, couple, I think A, town manager appoints the town clerk. I
Yeah, I
just
see
think
that.
that the appointment of the town clerk
Right.
probably may deserve its own line. Might be, the town clerk,
It's got his own sentence here.
but he shows up a lot more in this charter. I think that, how many people in town know that the town clerk is appointed by the town manager? Yeah, okay, we got 9 people here that do. That's wonderful, that's great. I think that's it for me.
How long-
Sorry I've been away, but
Peter, how long?
thank you for,
Thank you, Peter.
Well, that'd be a good question to hear Larry expound on.
Mr. Hutchinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Joe Hutchinson, Precinct 12. First comment is that I think what Peter was referring to is that if you look at the powers of the town manager, it gets buried in the long list, and he wants to pop it out, and I think it's probably a good idea to do that. It's just a matter of editorially segmenting it and giving it
It'd be
a
very
little more
easy to do that.
emphasis.
Yep.
It's an easy thing to do. So the other thing, I was impressed with Mr. Brindisi's comments, and also, I haven't had time to think about them, but it strikes me that they could have an enormous impact on how you form the charter, because he's seeming to me to urge a more skeletal form and then relying more on bylaws. So He'll provide an umbrella, he'll tell you himself, but he would provide probably an umbrella, and then have you folks probably form, at some point, I think one of the Collins folks mentioned a bylaw committee, and you would revise all the bylaws and then pop them up into the skeleton. That's kind of how it sounded to me. But it's worth thinking about, for sure.
Well, the COPC is always, since it was formed, is responsible for the bylaw committee.
Yeah, the COPC can already do a bylaw committee. I was confused by that.
That
Because
was
we
the
have
very-
in the charter, we have committee of precinct chairs can appoint a bylaw
Right,
committee.
that
now.
was the very first thing the committee of precinct chairs did within 2 hours after it was formed, was to appoint the bylaw committee. And the bylaw committee.
Have they done, I mean, is there a bylaw committee, and have they
No,
done?
not that I know of. They can appoint it, they haven't.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, we had
I
one
get
at
it.
the
I
very
mean, I remember
beginning.
what
For
the-
first 3 years.
I
of
remember
its-
the language of it,
Right.
but
First 3 years of its existence, there was a bylaw committee.
yeah.
And
I mean,
they wrote bylaws.
I have gone through the bylaws, and well, I agree. But what he was saying seemed to me to have structural impact. Enough said, I guess. The other thing was Martha and Peter and I didn't have the language that you folks were all working with this evening. So although we all come pretty regularly and understand from context what you're talking about, I'd really like to see what the suggestions were from the Collins Center. Because you were going through this and that, and I said, oh, that's what they mean, that's what they mean. It would be very helpful to have that. I'd also like to make an emphasis on what Bill said about the chasing of articles and the responsibility of that. And it got kind of confused with the conversation because wrestling doesn't want to talk about power. But I think that there needs to be some power to hold hold the provider of the article responsible. And you guys got to that later, and I wondered if you were talking about the same general idea, because I wasn't clear where the language from Collins was taking you and what then Bill was saying at the end. Does that make sense to you?
It does make sense, because what wrestling is concerned about, and what we're all concerned about, it's not really trying to have this oversight to be overreaching its authority to some other board's scope of responsibilities. We want to stay within our lanes, and one of the ways of making that happen is putting some of the putting the responsibility in the hands of the petitioner of the
right.
article to populate that information. There'd be a series of questions that
Right.
would be, that they would be required every 100 or 200 days to fill. Based on that information, the committee of precinct chairs can schedule a meeting with the selectmen to find out why these things aren't being acted on.
Right, well, and that would solve the electrician problem. Is that right? I
Well, at
think,
least it would bring it to the fore
yeah,
on a regular basis.
so cool, okay. That's what I wanted to
It
say.
isn't clear to me whether we've solved the paved road problem or not yet.
I'm sorry?
Whether we've solved the situation where we bring an article to town meeting because we feel there's a real need of the citizenry, and the boards in town, the select board, planning board, for whatever reason, don't want it, and are against it.
Bill was using the
Whether
paved
town
road.
meeting has that authority. We've done this in town meetings in the past, when there's an article that wouldn't otherwise have been passed, and town meeting gets behind an article and puts it through, and gets the appropriation, and then expects the work to be carried out.
Well, one of the things is we didn't talk about, that's at the back of that document that you guys haven't seen, is talks about enforcement of the charter.
Right.
And I see that.
Which is different a little bit.
I see that potentially, some of that is within that,
Yeah.
is the ability to say, this is in the charter, and someone be able to bring it to the fore. Then it becomes not of our doing, but it becomes a political instrument, because
This
it's,
is an example, the lower part of Wareham Road to the Plymouth-Wareham line is paved. And that was done 15 to 20 years ago, when the citizens down there wanted their road paved. It was dusty, the houses were all right up next to the road, it was terrible. There may be 20 houses there, both sides of the road, the last bit, and the town wouldn't do it. And we got a petition together, brought it to town meeting, and got it through town meeting with a good vote. And sure enough, the DPW did then pave that road. And it was the only portion of Wareham Road that's been paved for a long time.
Well, wrestling's example of the electrician is an example of it not happening.
And you see the distinction, because, you know, what we were talking about happened this came up at the precinct chairs, and, you know, JB was trying to explain it, and finally said, listen, I can't do it, I'll come back next year or something, and, but, right, but the fact is that, you know, the electricians didn't get hired, and we didn't know it until it came up accidentally, actually. So, you know, there needs to be some way, and I think that Bill's suggestion about the petitioner having to responsibly chase the status of the project is a good one. I think that works. That's just.
Now, who is?
Because
that
I always,
confused- sorry.
because I say that because if you, it's like wrestling's always bringing up the fact that Stevens Field, where is it, where is it? And that
I didn't know
is,
that.
it is a catalyst for me to get it done.
No,
But
no.
you're
I
only
haven't
as
seen
good as
anything
your
yet.
as a petitioner of an article, as a committee or a board or an individual, you're only as good as your last article. So if you get back up at town meeting and you try to sell another article, they're going to be saying, where are you on this other one, before we go any further? I'm sorry, Frank, I
No,
interrupted you.
I was a little confused in the sense that a lot of the articles that come before town meeting, the petitioner is the town. And sometimes those represent their consenting to some degree, but then they don't follow through anyway. So do they constantly have to report on,
those too,
do the select board constantly have to report on the articles that, okay?
Well, I was trying to devise a way that was efficient, because that can be overwhelming over a period of time for a department to keep an eye on these articles. But at the same time, it's a catalyst to get them over the goal line and get them off the books. If you look at David Gould's office, the Office of Marine Environmental Affairs, they're already doing this internally. They get these articles and they start lining them up.
Right.
And it actually helps the department become more efficient, more organized around their future responsibilities and their current responsibilities. So in some ways, Frank, it may help the department, as long as we devise a way that they can report on the status in an efficient way that isn't burdensome to them.
As long as it doesn't fall into the bit bucket, that's what I care about. So,
Okay, Ms. Hutchins, thank you very much. Just have one more thing to report on, which is old business, which is the town council, the council to the commission. Very shortly after I had a chat with the town manager on Friday, I got the first email from Lauren Goldberg at KP Law. Actually, it came on Saturday, and 2 hours later, I got a second email along with the proposal. So they've made a serious proposal. So the question to this commission is whether we open up the bids again, or whether we stick with Anderson and Krieger, and thank KP Law for submitting a proposal when it did come in. If you want to discuss it tonight, or we could do it at the beginning of our next meeting, it's up to this commission. David?
I'm going to make a motion, we stick with what we've decided and not
So
change
the motion's
counsel.
been made, has it been seconded that we stay with Anderson and Krieger?
I will
Is
second
your
that.
motion?
I will
Any
second that.
discussion?
I think that, to me, maybe I don't know what I'm talking about here, which is likely. There's a built-in conflict in what we're trying to do in hiring the attorneys for the town. So I didn't think that it was a reasonable consideration. I would have liked that they would have responded on a timely basis.
There's one further piece of information that I'm told that Anderson and Krieger is town special counsel for the whole, anything to do with Holtec. David?
Just wanted to see, because, I was absent when you talked about the other attorney, but when she puts in her billing rate, and that covers so many hours, Is that comparable to
Yeah,
Anderson and
the
Krieger?
billing rates are all pretty similar, about $300 an hour.
Okay, so there's not a potential dollar difference
No.
between them?
And it's going to be a relatively small part of our budget, as I see it. I mean, the big expenditure will be Collins.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to ask, just in case, one was twice as much more, than the other.
You say one is?
Yeah, I would say, if they
No,
were,
I
I
think they're
would want
they're
to know that.
comparable. They're comparable. David?
The reason for my motion, you know what? They had the same amount of time to apply as the others
Right.
did, and it was like, we're really not interested, but, okay, now we are interested, we'll submit a proposal. We had legitimate proposals, we seem to have a good attorney. I don't think we should switch.
Right. Also, one more thing on this point. I do think town council is going to come up during the discussion of this commission, whether it belongs in the charter or not, we can debate. But it's my understanding that our current budget for town council is many, many, many hundreds of thousands of dollars, whereas I'm told by, again, our new town manager, that the city solicitor's office in Worcester has, I don't know, 5 or 6 or 7 lawyers for less than that. They have a whole staff of solicitor, assistant solicitor, and attorneys that are there at their bidding. So we may well, I think we should discuss this whole idea of council and who we raise, whether it's in-house council or not. So, any other discussion about retaining Anderson and Krieger as our special counsel when we have legal questions? All in favor of that? It is unanimous. Thank you very much. Is there any other old business, Betsy?
The A through H items that you gave us for
Right.
COPC, are we going to discuss all of them or at some point? So that'll be at our next meeting. We will go through those A
I
through
think
H.
next week, I really think we'll have a more elaborate draft next week. And to the extent that one of those items isn't in the draft, we should discuss it.
Okay, thank you.
Or if there are any additional items. Any other old business, any new business?
I just wanted to,
No, the next meeting,
I like-
Scott.
I did like your idea about the solicitor. I don't know if that's something we want to incorporate into the charter or not, but I think that's an unseen by many expense that the town incurs repeatedly is the farming out of council. So I don't know if that's something that we want to look at putting into the charter in a different place or
Right.
something like that, but I do like that idea.
Putting it in, I mean, hiring in-house counsel.
Yeah, of having some type of a
As the
town
charter has
solicitor.
gone through the many years, since 20 years, every so often something big happens that even though technically you could put it in a bylaw, it went into the charter, just as kind of as an emphasis that it's a different direction the town was taking. You can leave it in the charter or take it out of the charter, but Scott's recommending that the council thing go into the charter, so we can talk about it.
Because
Any other,
just on the level of council, because I've often said that the town of Plymouth has council, outside council right now, and there isn't, under procurement laws, they don't have to go to bid, they just sit there. And I was suggesting that in the charter that we put language in there that every 3 years, the town manager has to take to this Board of Selectmen the results of town council, a report, a public report at a meeting describing the cost and their success. And at that point, the Board of Selectmen would have to continue with that council or ask the town manager to put it out to explore new council. Because there isn't anything in the charter that forces this question. The council, the current way that the town has been operating is that its legal counsel has been on, I think Copeland Page has been around for what, at least 25, 30 years now? 86. In 1986. So we've never had a public discussion about whether or not we want to continue this council based on how much they're charging us or the results of their activity. So at one point, I was suggesting that we put in the charter some language that forces that every 3 years, there's a presentation at a public meeting where the board has to vote to continue and to move on. Or,
Definitely a discussion we should have.
yeah,
Yeah, well, what they do, Bill, is they show a lower hourly rate than everybody else, but then they bill copious amounts of hours to make up for the lower hourly rate, so it's smoke and mirrors. They say, look at our council, they're billing this rate, which is lower than everybody else,
but then they just.
I think, if I could, good subject,
Next meeting.
not now.
No.
Okay, very good.
May I add
I
to
saved all
this?
my energy for the end.
Betsy?
May I just add to this, to this discussion, because something that I'm thinking about, and that is that when the spring town meeting is over, I don't usually know exactly how much money is going to the library, for example, because the benefits are over here, the repairs are over there, the maintenance is over here. And so when it all is said and done, is the library costing the town 1 million, 2 million, 3 million? I really don't know. I have asked for that information, I haven't received it. You know, exactly how much, how much are we spending on the fire department? I don't think we know, because the benefits are over here, the salaries are over there, the building maintenance is over here. And I think we need some way, and it may not go into the charter, it might, to find out exactly what each department is costing the taxpayer.
Let's put that on for another night. And tonight, I think we've done a good day's work.
Motion to
Motion to
adjourn.
adjourn? Second. All in favor?
Please.
We adjourn. Thank you.